So you guys, this is probably the most boring topic if you read across all the different panels, adapting Sentai footage. So I'm curious, maybe a couple of people can tell us um, why, what is it do you want to be writers, or are you just kind of curious about how we adapt the show, or are you Sentai fans? Can somebody maybe tell us? Yeah, tell me. And how many people here, by a show of hands, are here because they want to be writers and they want to see how we write the show? And then how many people are just more interested in just the nuts and bolts process of adapting the show? So I'll only say, and I that this I think it's the only show. Maybe some other Saban shows were done similarly, like VR Troopers and Masked Rider, but I think it's one of the other than the Saban shows. Are there any other shows that do that? That take a show and then steal the footage and put it in our show? So if you learn how to do this, it's kind of like being, the master of an art that really nobody wants. So be careful not to spend too much time perfecting this, because you can't take it anywhere else. At the same time, I'll say that story is story, and if you can learn to write stories and learn to put them together, whether it's footage or just something out of your mind, that's all very useful. Okay, so now I'm going to shut up for a minute and let Greg introduce himself, because Greg and I just met. I don't know Greg, he doesn't know me, but we're going to spend an hour together, so we'll tell you who we are.
Well, I am Greg Aronowitz. I was the executive producer on SPD, as well as the kind of writer, director, designer, makeup effects guy, prop builder, set guy. So kind of just had my hands in a little bit of everything on SPD. And one of the jobs was to take the Sentai footage and figure out how to make it into our show.
And I'm Chip, and I worked on the pilot. I didn't have all this gray hair when I worked on the pilot. And I was a production manager back then, and then eventually I became the executive producer for the last 10 years or something. But I worked on the show for many years under Haim Saban, and then Disney, and then Haim Saban again, and then Hasbro.
Wow.
And my contract just ran out, right? I just finished. So I come here mostly just to meet you guys and to see my old friends, the Rangers. But it's really fun when you guys have questions, because it's like shocking to me that people are interested in things like adapting the Sentai footage. But it's exciting that you guys are interested. So we'll tell you what we know.
How many people here watch both versions of every season?
When you say both versions, you mean the Japanese version and then the...
Yeah. Yeah, because if we're talking about adapting, it's kind of like, you see one and then it becomes the other. Like, do people compare? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's two different cultures, two different kinds of storytelling, and I personally believe that in Japan, the whole thing of Power Rangers is kind of like, it's just like a different audience, in terms of who they're targeting. The show seems like much more fun and almost silly. And then here, even though it's still fun and often silly, it's like we're trying to make it more like cool. So like it just seems like they'll do anything. There'll be an episode where there's a giant cup of soup attacking the city, and then we get it and we're like, how do we make that like cool? But I'm curious. So that's a lot of years of Power Rangers. Like how much of the Sentai show did you get to see before starting each season? Like particularly, I always wondered with Mighty Morphin, like did you guys just have, because they were years ahead, did you guys get to pull from a bunch of different stuff, or did you still only just get a season? Ah,
Hey, can you turn off the air conditioning? Is that possible? If you wouldn't mind. Thank you.
Well, gentlemen, I am so sorry.
No problem. It's okay. We kind of started without you. We apologize.
we just adapted.
Well, we are right back. Hello. Let me get me settled in. Hello. Watch this stuff. Hello. Here we go. So class, what did we miss so far? Hi, my name is Justin Keyson. I'm a co-host for a podcast called Nothing New, a remake podcast, and another show called Disney Plus Diversity. I'm assuming you gentlemen have already introduced yourselves, but give me a second to catch my breath. So sorry.
No worries.
Let me just tell you quickly. So the Japanese are always making this show, right? They make like 50 episodes every year. They change the theme every year. They're hardworking, incredibly good at this. They've been doing it for a decade or two before we even started. Haim Saban went to Japan, saw the show. He and his friend Shuki Levy decided they would try the show here. They tried it once. They made a pilot, and nobody would pick it up because it was too violent, right? So a couple years later, they tried it a second time, and that's when I came on board. And they put together like a little 6 or 7 minute presentation, and it got picked up. He thought it would go 1 or 2 seasons. As it turns out, it went longer than that. But the way that, see, what was your question you were asking about?
I was wondering how much material you got to work with.
So some seasons, Haim Saban is looking across all the shows that they did. Let's say they have 4 or 5 seasons he can choose from. At the time, they've done these shows. He looks at them and says, which ones are, as Greg was saying, the coolest? Trains. In Japan, they have a fascination with trains. Here we don't. So we don't do trains. Maybe medieval. Okay, we're kind of okay with medieval. But what's the coolest thing in the world? Dinosaurs, right? It never goes out of fashion. So Haim Saban looked at that and said, I'm going to do the dinosaurs. He hired a couple of talented people. They put together some scripts and things. If he had chosen the season they were working on currently, it's a problem. Why is it a problem? Because the one they're working on currently, they haven't finished, which means that you're starting to, they're giving you episodes. They're giving you literally, back then it was videotapes, which is, if any of you don't know, it's a piece of plastic about this big, right? Anyway, we got VHS tapes, and they would send them to us as they get done. And we don't know if, let's say that there's 52 episodes, usually 50 or 52 episodes in a season in Japan, because they do it once a week. We look at the ones they send us, and sometimes we say, well, what about the next 20? They say, well, we're still shooting right now. We'll give them to you when we're done. So we would start a season perhaps, and we don't even know how the show is going to end, right? Other times, Haim Saban could look at them and say, well, if I choose this one, which is a rescue vehicles, that one was done 2 years ago, so we can just have all 52 episodes. Now, Haim Saban and his toy company is saying, which one is coolest, which one will sell the most toys? He doesn't care which ones have seasons that are complete, which ones don't. But to Greg's answer, us in the story department, it's a real bitch if the season's not done yet, right? Because you're given, sometimes you're given pictures of the characters and pictures of the costumes in like 3 or 4 episodes, and that's it. You have no idea where it's going to go to.
Yeah, like who's the villain?
Right.
Who's the
you don't know who's going to die, who's going to live. You just don't know. And so you're signing, actors, and you're not even sure like how many episodes it might be in. Now, more recently, we have a new problem because now, let's say we have for Hasbro, or in the last few years, we come and we have like 3 or 4 shows we can look at. Now, they've made maybe a dozen that are possible, but what's changed in the last 10 or 15 years that limits our choices? Digital and the aspect ratio of the frame. When we were kids, well, he's younger than I am, but when I was kids, the TVs were like 3 to 4, right? And so nowadays you can't make a show out of a 3 to 4, and it was shot on film and the resolution was rather poor. So nowadays you have to buy footage that was shot in HD on digital so that it can be played on modern televisions. And if it wasn't shot that way, then forget it. We're not going to be able to air it. So obviously those seasons don't get chosen. So we're limited to choosing the seasons that are shot in the right ratio, hopefully that are complete, and that Haim Saban or Hasbro, whoever owns the show, thinks is cool and they can sell toys. The show has to be cool, and Hasbro, or excuse me, the Japanese people have, remember, they've designed most of the toys because they're on the screen already. Well, some of their monsters are really kind of unacceptable in the US, and some of them are really cool. So they choose the ones that are cooler. And all those decisions are made above our level. When they finally say to us, you're going to do dinosaurs based on this season, they might ask for our opinion, but really it's a marketing question, and they don't ask for our opinion on that.
Right. We just have to make it work.
So finally they say, okay, this is what you're doing, and they give us a bunch of tapes, as many as they can. And then what do we do with those tapes?
You watch them about 100 times. Sometimes you get translations. Sometimes you're like, I have no idea what's happening because they're not subtitled or anything.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't used to be subtitled.
Yeah. And you just pick through and figure out like what clips. Obviously nothing with the actors because it'll be our actors, but anything where they're in full suits or anything with the Zords. And did you guys have like mandatory footage amounts?
We don't. No, we didn't. Sometimes it's 1 minute, sometimes it's 0, but we don't tell anybody that because they got to be with you. But sometimes it's 7 or 8 minutes. But honestly, 7 or 8 minutes normally means that's all fighting, and in my opinion, that's when it gets boring.
No, but
right?
but sometimes the people above us are like, sometimes we do these things called clip shows where it's just like using as much footage as possible or recycling from other episodes because production wise, the footage is already paid for. Every time we have to go out with actors and shoot and build sets, that costs money. So it's like, the producers love when you use as much footage as possible. The writers are like, I'm trying to write this episode about these two characters falling in love, and somehow I have to wedge in this thing about a vending machine that goes crazy on the city. And, so you're just looking through and you have to like write down again. I mean, now there's probably ways to do it all digitally, but like, cause we also got, VHS tapes. So you're like rewinding and fast forwarding, and then you're trying to write down the time code. And, and sometimes it's just like 3 seconds, but you're like, oh, if I take this 3 seconds and I put it into this scene, I can make sense of it,
Hey, Chip. Hi, once again. So I actually have a very specific question for you, and it's regarding Lightspeed Rescue. The source material was Go-Go 5 in that show. And I found that the show you guys ended up creating kind of deviated from Go-Go 5. Obviously, you had to figure out how to use the footage.
Go-Go 5?
Go-Go 5. That was the Super Sentai show that Lightspeed Rescue was based on. And the show deviated from that because that show had like a team of brothers and sisters who became a Sentai team. And you guys kind of went to a more everyone, all walks of life kind of attitude with that show. People from different, like expertise and things like that. And as a fan of like 80s Sentai for me, I found that show to be like a fun throwback to 80s Sentai. Were you at all aware that's what you guys end up doing, or have any inclination of what I'm talking about?
So when you ask questions of me that are 15, 20, 30 years ago, or
Fair.
sometimes even yesterday, I just don't remember
It's fair.
all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you're producing the show,
Mm-hmm.
you got a million questions coming at you, for everything from what does this prop look like? Does this location work? The actor is sick today. The director did this terrible shot we have to pick up. And so I apologize, but I don't remember all this stuff. Lightspeed Rescue was a really great and fun episode because honestly, you start off with looking at the footage, and you get to see the images that are on there, and you just get to play with it in your head and say, where does this take me? So for instance, was it Lightspeed Rescue where we had the underwater? Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that was my idea. I mean, you're literally just sitting in a room, and a lot of people are not creative. They're the budget people, and then there's some writers and people who are creative, and those people are just having fun with it. Well, what if we go underwater? And the people are saying, no, they can't. That's too expensive. And then somebody else says, well, all we need is aquariums. And pretty soon you realize, okay, there's a way to do it. Remember, we're making a show for like 3 to 8 year olds. They're very forgiving. You watch it, and 2 minutes in, you just believe it's underwater, right? Yeah. And yeah, it can be goofy and weird. Now that changed because you guys grew up and you expected it to be, Marvel. But the first few years were all like for little teeny kids, and they were very unforgiving. So we could do some really goofy stuff. And you guys seem to have fallen in love with it. And here we are 30 years later, all celebrating it. But at the time, we, especially this guy who worked in the art department, I'm not an art department person. I don't know how the hell they come up with it, dinosaurs and all this stuff on budget. Somehow or another, in the writing staff and the producing staff, we come up with these crazy ideas, looking at the footage, which is exactly what you're talking about, adapting the footage. And then the art department, which he has specialized in the past, and I've not, somehow they come up with drawings. And you look at the drawings of the caves and the things and the underwater and all this stuff, and you say, yeah, but how are you going to do that? And they say, don't worry about how we're going to do it. I'm not going to explain that to you. That's not your job to understand how we're going to do it. You gave us a budget. We're going to hit the budget. Do you like these sets? And you say, I love these sets, but you can never do it on budget. And they say, shut up. That's not your job. And somehow they come up with it. And you hug them all day long. And you love your crew because you ask for 8 and they give you 10. And that's when you know that you've succeeded, when you have a crew that makes you look better than you are. Okay, so I talked too much.
No, that's great. Greg, actually, I have a question for you concerning obviously Power Rangers SPD, and again, very much like I kind of similar question I asked to Chip was that like I felt like your guys' show did a lot, took a lot from the original source material. I felt a lot of Deca Ranger in the show with some deviations with new characters, except for Commander Kruger, who is, by a lot of fans' account, one of the few direct. He was the Sentai character that you just brought over to the American version of the show. What is it about, Doggy Kruger, Commander Kruger that you guys liked the initial concept, or what was it so much about that character that you felt that you could just keep the majority of that character for SPD?
Well, first of all, with Kruger, I'm a huge dog lover. I have 5 dogs. So I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. This is like a show about dogs in charge of the universe. I thought, speaking from the art side, when they showed me the initial clips of Deca Ranger, I was like, these Power Ranger suits are amazing. The Zords are amazing. The whole future city aspects are amazing. I'm like, this Commander Kruger looks like the 1984 Olympic mascot. And I'm like, again, it's a different aesthetic, no knocking it. Like for their show, it completely worked. I mean, this is also a show where the Pink Ranger took a bubble bath every episode and her communicator was her back scrubber. So it just had a different sensibility. I wanted to make like a serious show, So, but I still love the idea of him. So I was like, you know what? I'm not going to redesign this character from scratch. I'm going to just adapt it to like as if this kind of like, high school mascot became a real boy. Like, what would it look like? So I kept the colors, I kept the basic shapes. I just made it look real. Writing wise, and I need to say, and that's why I was curious, in all those years, how much footage there was, because I was told that this was the first time in the history of the show that the Sentai version and the US version were shooting simultaneously. Oh. So I only received the one tape to start. And they were still shooting everything else to the point where we had no idea, like, who the bad guy was going to be, and so I guess I got lucky that Disney, I don't know if they just were over it and they didn't care, or if they actually trusted Bruce and I enough. They were just like, yeah, just figure it out. Just do what you want. So I was able to create, Grum as our stable bad guy. Cause we're like, no matter what happens, even if they introduce another bad guy, we can make him like, a co-bad guy or whatever. But Kruger, the storyline was pretty clear in the beginning of what he was going to be, and we just stuck with that. But do keep in mind, like you said, we carried a lot over. Right off the bat, I changed it from they're a police squad, and I made it into an academy.
Right, that's true. Yeah,
and I told Bruce, I said, yeah, I'll come on board, but I love Power Rangers, but I feel like it just needs a new version. The idea of these 4 kids or 6 kids that an alien lands and Green Lanterns them and says, "You are now the most powerful kids in the universe." I'm like, I want to make a story about having to learn how to become that, and I got a lot of resistance, from the from the company and stuff. We finally broke through, and I think it made it. I don't know if anyone else has used that format, but I think it made a refreshing kind of break.
Yeah. No, I think so. I chip back to you. So Time Force, I found fascinating because I also was also watching Time Ranger as well, kind of comparing the two, and I found Time Force to also be one of the few Ranger seasons where it felt like almost an even more close adaptation of the original source material. You guys mostly stuck with that storyline of that season of the Super Sentai. Do you recall the reasons why that year was like that?
Well, the footage, as I recall, okay, so again, I don't remember it exactly, but the idea that you're going to go through time and you're going to have somebody in the future and in the past who are the same character or related somehow is pretty much a trope, right? Except that if you're a little kid, you haven't seen all the movies that have already, worn out that plot. So to them, it's like, wow, this is a really great brand new plot, even though it's kind of not. So we probably stuck with it for that reason. And because, sometimes the footage in the Japanese are really good. Before there were subtitles in the story room, we had to, just sit there and watch the tape and kind of guess what they were saying and what was going on. But they're so good at their, at the way they do their body motions and things, you can kind of understand the story. They aren't like a lot of American shows where they're just two people sitting and they talk to each other and you have no idea what the plot is. But because of their expressions and the way they move, you can pick up a lot of it. So we would watch it with no subtitles. We would kind of guess our way into it. And we would think, well, we kind of like that element. And they utilize it in the footage enough that we have to stick with it because there's two Red Rangers. We may as well stick with the idea that they're brothers, something like that. It just makes it easier sometimes to utilize what they have. Now, so that's the answer to the question. But I want to tell you, you guys want to hear a funny story? Okay, so you were asking about the Lightspeed Rescue underwater thing. So we built this beautiful underwater base, right? And of course, you always, everything is the last minute. So they're painting the last minute. We start to shoot in 2 days. And then like the night before, all these saltwater aquariums were in there and they had to put in all the fish, right? And we came in the next day and all the fish were dead. So we couldn't shoot because there's no fish. So anyway, it was a big problem. Well, I mean, we could shoot, but we had to shoot with them like just a little corner of an aquarium in the shot. Which is what happens when you go out to film. You can't, you have a crew of 100 people showing up. You can't decide not to film. So you have to somehow make it work. Another thing that Greg had mentioned was, sometimes footage is just not usable. We have certain rules on our show to meet. It used to be broadcast standards had these rules that we had to follow. For instance, we can't have anybody hit anybody to the face or kick anybody to the head. Have you guys ever noticed that on the show? So sometimes there's a really great shot the Japanese will do, or even our guys will do it, and accidentally or intentionally they'll hit them in the head. So how do we cover that up? We put a visual effect over it, right? We put an explosion or we put a spark or something because we can't show them hitting. Also, there's some footage that just comes from Japan, which is completely inappropriate. I don't know if some of you watched the Japanese show with the trains several years ago, and the Megazord is standing there.
Yeah,
like
okay,
this,
yeah,
right?
we're aware.
So for those of you who don't know what everybody's laughing about, it's that the part of the train looks like a big erect penis that rises up in front of it.
I was trying to walk around that, but yeah, I know.
Right. And so, you look at that and you could either utilize a season and cut that out, or you could put a tree in front of it or something. And that's what we end up doing. We have shots of Japanese sometimes that we use, and the shots are so wonderful. With, with, for instance, something flying through the air and the people are running and screaming and explosions are going off. We don't want to duplicate that shot. It costs a fortune, but we want to use it. So what we'll do is we'll go to green screen and we'll get some shots of Caucasian people or black people or running, and we'll stick them in the screen because otherwise it's all Japanese, and that's not our show, right? So there's ways of fixing it, and other times you just throw it in the trash and say we can't use it.
We'll get to that in a minute. Greg, I actually want to talk to you about one moment in SPD that I think a lot of fans are a big fan of, which is called Nothing Enters the Circle. And do you know what I'm talking about?
I know what you're talking about.
Great.
Really? Are there big fans of
There are
that?
big fans of that, and it's funny because there was an Ava Ranger Deca Ranger crossover, but you
Right.
guys didn't really utilize that footage. You made this sequence, which is original to your show. In my opinion, I feel that sequence to me really has the spirit of Super Sentai in it. It feels like something that would have come from a Toei show. Can you talk to us a little bit about that scene?
I mean, that's a hard one for me to talk about. I think that was definitely more on the Bruce side. I'm kind of fighting a battle on those episodes because I knew we had to do the crossover, but I just again wanted to do something fresh and different, and we had two different timelines. Dino Thunder was the early 2000s, and then SPD was 2025, which is coming up, by the way. Hopefully we do some big anniversary thing here.
Ooh, please.
Although there's no flying cars or aliens, so I'm super disappointed. But the particular footage we were using to make those episodes had this scientist that found these crystals and was experimenting with the crystals. And so I said, oh, this is brilliant because those could be the dino gems, and we can tie this in where he's doing kind of like a Jurassic Park experiment, and he uses DNA from those crystals and brings the Dino Thunder Rangers back like as clones. And Disney was just like, no, it's just time travel. And I'm like, like you said, it's just such a trope, and it gets used so many times. I'm like, and they were just like, no, kids won't understand cloning. And like, but kids understand the, space-time, I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. And of course it was the one time where I just ended up screaming and yelling and fighting, but I lost. And so it ended up being time travel. So I was kind of tuned out on those episodes. Of course, later that year, this show came out called Clone Wars that every child loved. And I was like, oh, see. But, in terms of the whole circle thing, it's a lot of people come up to me and kind of say it in a weird, I'm
Really?
almost making fun of it. Yeah. I don't know.
surprising.
There was just something, I think it was because there was so many shots of it. It went on for so long, but I'm glad you like it.
I think it's very Super Sentai.
There was
personally.
also our episode that accidentally leaked out of order. Do you guys remember that?
Yeah.
So that whole, anytime anyone brings that up, it's just a little bit of pain. So
Sorry about that. I'm a fan of it, so it means
well, that's
anything.
good.
This is actually kind of a question for both of you guys. Was there any particular moment in the Sentai footage you guys watched that you liked, but maybe ended up not using for any particular show?
Tons of them.
Please.
Yeah.
Any specific you can remember?
Well, no. I don't. No, but it
I'll take the yes.
It happens so often that they do something that you love, but you can't use it for one reason or another. And so if you have the money and the time, you just reshoot it, and you reshoot it in your own way. And sometimes it's even better because we have, if you guys could go to Japan, you'd all want to go into the first unit, and watch the actors because that's really fun. But I'm talking about actually the American show in New Zealand. It's all a New Zealand crew now. They have two units. The first unit works with the actors walking and talking. The second unit all stunts. The second unit is mostly all the stunt crews all from Japan, and they're the same people who do some of the Japanese shows, and it's an astonishing thing to see. So you can ask them, you can look at something in the footage and say that's really amazing, but we can't utilize it for some reason or another. It doesn't work. Sometimes they have, for instance, great shots, but they have machine guns, or great shots and their actors are drinking alcohol. We just can't do that. So we want to reshoot it. We want to utilize it in our episode because we love the plot point. And so we simply say to our crew, can we do this? And I'm telling you, 9 times out of 10, they figure out a way how. We are a really tight budget show, but still they figure out a way of doing it. And a lot of it comes from the fact that, especially on the second unit, it's a Japanese stunt crew, and they have the same mentality of the people who shot the original show. I'm telling you, you go there, they're wearing spandex, they're rolling downstairs, they're smashing in the walls. One morning, I remember we were shooting on location in New Zealand, and the truck showed up late. Why? Because the Japanese guy was racing to the set, and he rolled it over on the side, right? It was full of stunt mats and stuff, and he crashed the truck. And of course, all of the New Zealanders and the Americans were like, "Oh my God, is he okay?" And where is he? And is he all right? And what happened? Is there another car involved? That's our first reaction. The guy gets to the set and he's okay, and he has to stand before the whole Japanese crew and put his head down and apologize for being late. And that's the Japanese mentality. You've held us up. You've cost us 10 minutes, and so you owe everybody an apology. It didn't even occur to me, 10 minutes, he crashed, whatever, it's going to cost time. But their first thought was, why the hell did it happen? And our first thought was, is he okay? Now, of course, that's not to say they don't care about him. It's just to say that they are very regimented.
Yeah, it's very disciplined.
If you give them a shot to do, you have to be careful because they'll break bones to get that shot for you. So the answer is yes. There are things that you wish you could use that you can't, but they'll always find a way to figure it out and get it for you.
FYI, again, I apologize that I'm 10 minutes late to this panel. Greg, you have an answer for that?
Yeah, I mean, because I only have one season, like I remember the footage very clearly, and I would say Gold Ranger. We didn't get to use them because again, we were running simultaneously, so a lot of times we would only get episodes to write new episodes like the week before we would have to shoot them. We were already coming up to our finale, and they also, I think we did 38 episodes and they did 44 or something. So they were still adding stuff when we were trying to tie up all these loose ends. And we were pretty much, locking our final scripts, and they're like, here's some more tapes. And they had this beautiful gold Ranger, and we're like, well, we can't fit this in. There was also the Nova Ranger, and I was just like, well, she's just showing up to grab Omega to, so we just literally one shot had her in there, but we couldn't get the gold in. At the time, because of the backup, Disney was like, well, you know what? We can't risk, being behind next year waiting for their new footage. So maybe we'll just use everything we have and do a second season of SPD. And we were like, oh, this is going to start with Gold Ranger coming in. And then they pulled the plug on that. So
can I ask you, Greg, when you have that Japanese gives you 50 episodes and you're only going to make 40, how do you decide which 10 to not use?
Well, we didn't even get the other 10 till we were wrapping up.
Oh, that's right.
So I'll have one more question for you both, and then we'll take it to the audience. And this one, again, both of you guys. Now, every year it seems like there's a rumor that there will be a season of Power Rangers that won't use the Super Sentai footage. They'll make their own 100%. That rumor keeps happening every year. How do you guys feel about that? Do you think something is lost when you don't use the Super Sentai?
Go ahead.
Well, here's the thing. I think that it is possible. As you said, the second unit team, like a lot of times you'll go and be like, oh, we need to, we can't use this piece of the fight. So we need a transitional thing that will combine these two clips, and they'll go and reshoot the entire thing and make it better a lot of the times. And so I kept saying to my producers, we have the team, the money's spent, like why are we locked into this footage? Because they kept saying like, oh, it's too expensive to shoot original footage. Well, we kind of were anyway. I mean, there's so much second unit footage that ended up on the cutting room floor that it could have been a whole show. That being said, the stuff with the Zords and everything, like nobody does it better. I feel like even if they put it in my hands, like I would get a little too, ILM with it and try and like have the buildings be like too real and too like there's just something that screams Power Rangers that I don't think we would be able to reproduce. So if I had another shot to do it, I would love to be able to use like their Zord fights, but then everything else original.
Can I say something? So,
please.
How many of you guys, by a show of hands, would prefer the show become animated? Oh, you're going to be in trouble after the show. And how many people wanted to stay live? And how many people wanted to stay as an adaptation of the Sentai footage so there's Japanese in there? So, and I would agree because, as Greg said, the Zord footage is quite unique. I mean, it's so goofy. But it's almost like a rite of passage as a kid. You got to see this goofy Japanese footage, right? Mm-hmm. If you go to Japan, I've been there several times, and they actually have a sound stage. It's kind of small. It's probably about a little bit bigger than this room, but not too much bigger. And all they shoot in there is, for all their shows, they shoot the Megazord fights. That's interesting, huh? It's a time bomb. So, yeah, and what they have a little sound stage, and they have different skies they can drop down in the background, and they have the whole, like, I don't know, half of the warehouse is filled with big shelves, and on each shelf there's like city buildings, and then there's country buildings, and then there's mountains, and outside generally are these big rolling, platforms with big mountains that they just push them in and move around, and they're all miniature mountains, miniature buildings, miniature cars. It's really a cool place to go to see this sound stage. And the guys who are in there working, that's all they do. They just, they don't know what the rest of the story is. They just know they have a fight between this monster and this monster in a country setting, and it has to last, 90 seconds long or whatever it is. And that's all they do for a living. And if the Kiwi or Americans were going to start doing that, because there was a discussion during some of our seasons, hey, we should do our own. Why would they want to do their own? Because the toy company doesn't like the design of a Megazord, and they want to redesign it. But if we do that, we can't use the footage. And so they'd say to me, well, how much is it going to cost to shoot? It's very, very expensive. And you already own the footage from Japan. So literally it's you pay zero or you pay hundreds of thousands of dollars. Right. And they say, well, okay, but can you do it? And my answer is the footage that you're objecting to, they say, maybe they say, well, the Japanese footage isn't very dynamic. And I say, these people have done it for 50 years. And you're asking me if we, in the very first year, can do better than they've done it for after 50 years. And the answer is no, it's going to look like crap. Now, maybe after a few years, it'll look better and better because we can add visual effects and stuff. But, we're kidding ourselves if we think we're going to be as good as the Japanese right away. I mean, these people are really, really good. They aren't doing it casually. They're quite determined to do a good job. So we would say to them, for instance, if we don't like the footage, we would say, at the beginning of the season, we would comment and say, could you give us more low angle shots with cars in the background? Could you put more green screen characters running in the foreground to not give away that it's a miniature? Could you do, a little bit more background smoke or moving cars instead of static cars? So we would give some opinions about the Megazord fights to try to liven them up a bit. And the Japanese are they would listen very closely, and sometimes they would do what we want. Sometimes they wouldn't, but usually they would because they're team players, and they I imagine that their deal is that they profit the more successful the American show is. They have a profit interest. So if we make a suggestion, then they would they would accommodate us. And one of the most interesting things the Japanese would do sometimes, they would come to us and say, what kind of we're developing the show next season. What kind of toys or what kind of vehicles, what kind of something would you like to put on the show that you've never put on before? And after you've done the show for 10 years, it's very useful for them to ask us that, right? From an American perspective, what would you want? And isn't that an amazing question to get? And so I say, well, I want a car that then, transforms into something flying. And they don't laugh at you. They get in a little huddle and they speak in Japanese and they say, okay, what else? And sure enough, they come up with a car that then flies, and they always do it. It's a little goofy, but usually they do a pretty good job. And that's one of the most fun jobs of adapting the footage, is to be able to give opinions to them of things that you might think that from an American perspective would serve to improve it or improve toy sales. That's something that very rarely comes up, but when it does, it's really, really fun.
All right.
Just don't suggest a female Red Ranger. They did not like that.
Unfortunate. We'll now take it to the fans. I saw your hand with the green shirt first. Go ahead.
And you have to speak kind of loud and clear, okay?
Yeah.
So those shows were made under Haim Saban, right? Do you guys know anything about Haim Saban? Anybody know him? There's only two people in the room who know Haim Saban. That's me, and this is our casting director, Iris, right there. Everybody know Iris? If you want to be a Power Ranger, that's who you talk to right there. And her husband sitting next to her is a wonderful man who was our production manager for many years on the show.
Wow.
So 150 people, but the heart of the show is Iris right there. So Haim Saban, he thought, I'll tell you a secret, he thought the show was going to run for a few seasons, and that's it. But it took off. he thought that if we changed the cast over and over and over, that the fans might not enjoy, seeing it change. Because most American shows, stay with, Gilligan's Island. You guys are too young for Gilligan's Island, but Gilligan's always the same Gilligan, right? So it doesn't become, Joe's Island the next season. It's always Gilligan. So the Rangers, he thought, well, if we change them out, it's a problem. But yes, it's particularly a problem with the footage because some seasons there's 5, some seasons there's 6, some seasons there's 4. How do we explain when they come and go? There were, in the first couple seasons, a few Rangers left. You guys remember that? And they went, I forget what was the explanation. You guys know what happened?
Switzerland Peace Conference.
Right. Okay. Okay. And that's another secret story that I can't tell you. But anyway, so it was very problematic. But Haim Saban, unlike what Greg had to put up with from Disney was very controlling. They have a brand. They get involved in every story. And Haim simply says, they're shooting on the mountain over here. And then, the footage goes to this building over here. They get thrown through a tree and they end up inside the building. He's like, you figure it out. You're the writers. That's what I pay you for. And that's a blessing because he knows you'll do a good job, but he knows he's not a writer, so he stays out of it. Disney micromanages things a lot of the time, and it's a pain in the butt for people who are creative because you're banging heads. So Haim Saban would simply say, okay, now there's 4 Rangers. How do we get rid of them? And I'm not going to waste my brain space on this. I got other things to do. You tell me how it's going to work. So you figure it out. You look at the footage. You figure it out, and you go to Haim and you pitch an idea, or you go to whoever owns the show, and they say yes or no, and that's it. So somebody loses his power this season. Shuki Levy one season wanted to have chimpanzees built bulk and skeleton to chimpanzees. Have you ever dealt with chimpanzees on the set? You have people on the set with guns all the time because and the whole crew is warned you can't look them in the eye because they'll attack you. So literally people are like working in kind of a high tension environment. It's supposed to be you guys are having fun watching it, but we're all like, oh my god, it's kind of scary. So all these things become challenges, but especially that footage because Haim Saban wanted to keep the same cast, and so God bless him, he did. But when the costumes change and males become females and they go from 4 to 6 and back down to 3 and then back up to 5, where do they come from? What do they do? And some cast decide that they're tired, they want to leave the show, or somebody else is a relative, somebody wants to be in the show. It's all that stuff is a challenge. But you know what? That's your job as a writer, is you have to just somehow get creative and work it out. And there's no show, we're a non-union show. So like the people that I hired in New Zealand, I went to New Zealand, me and Jackie Marchand, you guys know who Jackie Marchand is? Right, so wonderful, wonderful lady who wrote the show with me, right? For many, many years. Lots of other writers too, but for many seasons, we lost a lot of our writers, and it was just Jackie and I. So I went to New Zealand, and there were no writers. So I hired these 2 people who were kind of learning how to write, and I taught them how to write the show. And they were like shocked. We have to come up with everything. Yep, Japanese have a few ideas, but otherwise you come up with everything. And that's what you guys, if you want to adapt a show or create a show, that's what you have to do. You have to imagine the world as a blank canvas, and what are you going to do? Okay, you want to have a car that flies. You want to have a ranger who's gay. And yeah, you're going to have headwinds to all those things, but it's your job to come up with a way of compromising and negotiating, not giving up, but somehow battling through to make that stuff happen because your audience wants you to do crazy stuff, especially on our show, right? Otherwise, it's boring if it's just the normal stuff. So we do some crazy things, but everything is a battle, from the footage to the casting to the budget. Everything is a battle on a show like this, which is what makes it fun.
Let's see, you over there. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. That was a similar situation where, as we were wrapping SPD, they were getting us to sign on for the next season, and they only had 2 episodes of
Magi Ranger.
Yeah, Magi Ranger. And I was just like, ugh, this is There's like the talking sunflower, and I was just like, okay, here's the deal. We're in New Zealand. Like, we're in Middle Earth, So all this footage is about magic robots and there's powers. As Chip said, our second unit is so great that after SPD, they actually called and said, we're going to come film the opening sequence. We want Koichi, who's the stunt coordinator, to film this whole opening sequence for our next season. Like, so they started using us. And so I'm like, so why are we going to be trapped into this idea of these kids using magic in downtown Auckland? I'm like, for the same budget, we can go, and I wanted to basically make the school like Hogwarts and do it like as a past, like a prequel to Mighty Morphin, where there were, these rangers in the past, and these like kind of Hogwarts students have to go on a quest through our version of Middle Earth to find these, and they were just like, hell no, even though, I had my whole book of like all the things I created for SPD, and where they said, oh, you could just have your 2 main sets, and I ended up building like 25 sets for the same budget, and they were like, you can have 5 aliens, and I did 40 aliens. I was like, I could do this, and they were just like, no. I was like, all right. I'm not gonna fight. Like, I don't want to do it if it's not gonna be fun,
Let's see. Some of you back there, Fire Ranger.
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, he was saying like you said you can talk to the Japanese team about ideas, but there's these reoccurring things like ninjas, dinosaurs. What is something new that you would want to see?
I don't know that there's anything new that I would want. I mean, we kind of done everything, right? There's almost, 800 or 900 episodes now. So I don't know that there's any themes that the Japanese do. That I think they've kind of covered all the things that kids love. What about you? You think anything?
Has there been a Western?
No.
Yeah, we try not to use animals too much. So you guys ever watch the episodes in the last few years? There was a Labradoodle. There was 2 Labradoodles that would walk through the shot every now and then, and then one of them died, and then so those were my dogs.
Oh.
Because what happens is we're doing an episode about somebody who somebody wants a puppy. I think it was the episode, and something about animals. And so they're walking through the park. Somebody has a parakeet. Somebody has this or that. And I said, somebody has to have a dog. Well, you know what it costs to have a dog walk through a shot? You have to hire the dog. You have to hire the trainer. You have to pay the trainer the previous day for a day of training to be able to get the dog accommodated or acclimated to whatever the movement's going to be in that shot. So it ends up being, $1,000. And it just makes me so aggravated that the production assistants on the set are getting like $100 a day, but the person who walked the dog through is going to get $1,000. And so I would say, no, my partner will come and walk the dogs through the shots, and there's no charge. and so the dogs were in every season. You guys, if you watch closely, the dogs were in the last 3 or 4 seasons. You guys ever see my dog? No? Never? Okay, watch more closely. It's kind of an apricot colored Labradoodle. 2 of them.
Take up more questions. Yeah, you're right there in the front. Yeah.
Well, I would have to say, I don't know how it was for you. I was under Disney rule. So I did fight for it because there were just parts of, I was trying to tell an overall story, and I think they were thinking like very episodically. And there were times, especially in the beginning, when I was trying to show that these were cadets who weren't Power Rangers and they had to learn how to be Power Rangers. so there just weren't things that fit, and I was trying to push against it. And I'm super curious to see if you had these rules, but they kept telling me like, no, there are rules. Like the audience will not watch this show unless every episode the characters morph, the characters get in their Zords, and there's a fight. And I was like, because I didn't want in my first episode of these students to morph into Rangers and jump into the Zords. I wanted them to have to learn how to do that and earn. So I was trying to push it, and I got to push it as far as into the second episode where they had to. But in the first episode, they did not. But there was just all this stuff about there are these rules. So
Yeah, if you look at the first few seasons, Haim Saban had his hands on everything. He read every script. He'd come to the set quite often. He cared about every single little detail, and he watched every episode and he'd give his notes, and he was scathing sometimes, but then he kind of backed off after the show became popular, and he trusted us to do it because we'd been on it. And so eventually I went from being production manager to directing and writing, and then to being the story editor. And by then he had very little to do with it. And that's when we made the shows that you guys all like. Lightspeed Rescue, right? The one, and if you notice, there's not that much comedy in those. Those are a little bit more kind of dark Marvel kind of stories, right? And so in those, we would try to minimize Megazord fights because honestly, they're not my favorite part. There's no plot to them. There are fights where people just fight, and you cut from Ranger to Ranger to Ranger, and that's just a fight, okay? And and in the script, you literally write, and this is literally what you write in the script. You say, the Rangers run in to the warehouse. The villains run out of the shadows, and they kick, they punch, they fly, they zip, they Zor. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Second
and
unit
then the
figures
second
it
unit
out.
comes. If they have a half a day, they'll give you a 40-second fight, and if they have a whole day, they'll give you a minute 10 fight, and you'll cut as much as you need into the footage. But the footage that they shoot that is just fights is kind of boring to me. I mean, there's some good moves and we keep them, but when there's a fight that actually has a plot, where you have to rescue somebody, or there's a vial that is tumbling on the ground and they're trying to get it, or somebody is slowly turning into a werewolf as they fight, those are much more interesting, right? Because you can play with the timing and you can add suspense to them. Megazord fights are never like that. Very rarely. They're pretty damn boring, right? Two sides come in, they fight. If somebody flies or fires a missile, yeah, there's some things you want to keep in there because it's cool. But generally speaking, you get in, you get out because you have to sell the toys. The most common time that we don't do Zord fights is in the first episode because, as Greg said, you're introducing the Rangers and you spend so much time. You make the first. We got in the habit of always making the the premiere episode into like a two-parter, and two-parters are. They don't like it. The networks don't like it. Why? Because they get played out of order. And so now suddenly they're playing part two when there was never a part one, and the audience gets confused and they go away. So I understand that. We would always try to make sure there was a recap and make sure there's enough of each one that you can enjoy them alone, but they don't like two-parters. But to do away with the Megazord fight was a challenge. You could do it if you wanted to, but you always had to have some kind of big finale no matter what, because the kids do expect a formula, right? That's what they're watching for.
Okay, we'll take one more question, and let's see, you over there, and you better make it good. It's the last one. No pressure. Go.
Did you have battleizers?
No, you go.
So, all right. Well, here's the thing we're not supposed to say.
One of them.
Yeah. Power Rangers is a toy commercial.
Mm-hmm. No.
Yeah. They're like, you can't tell anyone. I'm like, I think they know.
We know.
So, we get the footage. And there's the Rangers, there's the Megazords, there's all that stuff. Those are all created as toys by Bandai and Toei Designs and all that stuff. we inherit all that, and there's a certain amount of that gets sold here. You know, the morphers, all that stuff. I don't know when it started. I don't know if it was a Disney thing or if it happened before, but it's like, you know, everyone wants more and everyone wants their own little piece. So someone was like, well, what's something we can make for our show that we can make a toy? And they, for us, for sure, it was, we had the battleizers and we had the motorcycles. Why there's no motorcycles for the girls, I don't know. And it's just,
Yeah.
it's like the modern world, and they're, you know, and you're like, oh, girls don't ride motorcycles. I'm like, whoa, is this the 1940s? Like, what is happening? And Alicia will tell you, like, well, I had the Jeep, so I was fine. But Monica didn't get to drive; she was just in the passenger seat. But anyway, so with the battleizers, they were still like, I had input on mine. My dream with Rick, who was also inherited from Deca Ranger. I loved the design. Again, at the time I had a pit bull terrier that looked exactly like Rick, so I was like, great, my dog is in the show. But they didn't do anything. All he turned into in that footage was the gun, the cannon.
Yeah.
And I was like, all right, I'm gonna redesign him. Like, he'll look the same, but internally he's gonna be able to turn into all these different things: the scooter and a refrigerator, and you know. So when the opportunity came up for the battleizer, it was like, well, it's got to be Rick. And they did a great job with it. But it didn't, we weren't like, you know, it would be a cool thing to have in this show. It just came from the, you know, merchandising team. They're like, this is a toy you have to sell. And we did.
Can I just say something that kind of to it's not quite so cynical. So everybody thinks the show is a commercial, but isn't everything on TV and everything in the movie theater a commercial? It's all trying to sell itself. So you'll come and watch it. You'll watch the commercials. You'll buy the toys if there are toys. They're all like that. But if you go to sleep every night saying that your life is all about trying to sell somebody else's toys, that's not a pleasant way to sleep. So here's what I tell my writers. And this is something that I learned from a guy named Brian Goldner, who was the CEO of all of Hasbro, right? He started out as the sales rep from Bandai on Power Rangers, and when Hasbro finally bought the show, it was because Brian Goldner went from being the sales rep from Bandai to being the guy in charge of all of Hasbro. Really terrific guy. And he told me in the parking lot of a Red Lobster one night, he said, the way to sell toys is to have a show where the kids who watch it aspire to be the friends of the Rangers. And isn't that what we all want? Don't we all want to have friends like the Rangers? When we write the show, when we create the show, we're not just, you know, we want villains that are realistic and they're terrible people, but the Rangers, we build them as characters that we would love to know and we would love to hang out with. Wouldn't we all love to hang out with every single one of those Rangers, or to be them, or to have their skills, or to save the world the way they can? And if you can tell stories that put you in their shoes or holding their hand as their friend, then forget about selling toys. They're going to sell themselves. You tell the story, and I always tell my writers, we tell the stories, and the toys will sell themselves. Hasbro, Disney, Haim Saban never came to me and said, we want you to do, you know, we need to sell more of this, so put this more in the show, or make that more heroic because we need to sell. They never ever said that to me. They always, they might say, you know, this is the toy schedule for the season, and we would figure out a way of using it, and we'd find heroic ways to do it. But always in the context of a story that makes our fans love the Rangers more. Because having the gift, the privilege, the honor, the responsibility of 30 minutes of millions of kids Saturday morning is really big. And you can't waste that on a commercial. You have to spend that wisely on time that you teach them something, you show them something, a better way of doing something, a better way of being a person, a better way of being a friend, a better way of making a friend. And if you can move their lives, not by miles, but by inches over the course of the few years that they'll watch our show, then you can sleep at night with a smile on your face because you've done something wonderful. You know, and after the decades go by and you're still doing the same damn thing. And the first time I ever realized that was I came to Morphicon, and people like you came up to me and said, wow, I love this episode and it meant so much to me. I never knew that we were making such a difference to people. But you go on any show that you guys want, you're talking about you guys are not just fans, because fans, if we were actors, you would just be fans. You guys are fans who are interested in making a show like ours and writing it and developing it and figuring out how it's made. You have even the slightest bit of interest. The first thing you have to know is you have to find a good reason to do it. And it can't be to get rich, and it can't be, you know, something shallow. If you go into it with the goal of actually wanting to make somebody's life or the world a slightly better place. Not a big change, but the smallest change with thousands of characters over the course of hundreds of episodes. You're going to make a difference, and that's when you can all be proud of what you do. And I'm very proud of what I did for all these years, and I'm sure Greg is as well, and everybody out there is, and they're all dying to meet you guys because clearly they've made a difference out there, or people wouldn't come from miles and miles around to pay good money to meet them. So anyway, so you compliment all of us by being here, and I really appreciate you taking the time to ask us all your questions about our silly little goofy show. It actually makes a difference.
So I was just informed that the next panel, the couples panel, is actually canceled. So we have the room for one more hour. So are you guys up for maybe a couple more questions since we have the room a little bit longer?
Yeah, we can do a few more.
All right. Let's see. Black Ranger shirt over there.
Now wait, which tease? Which one are you talking about? Right. So so how many people like RPM? Yeah. And yeah. So that was a Disney show. Are you familiar with that? Right. So and that one was one where Disney didn't have their hands on. They let them make, in my opinion, even though I know you guys like RPM, it was a little too post-apocalyptic. I mean, what 3 to 6-year-old wants to watch a vision of the world where it's been destroyed? I thought it was depressing, but I came in there and we did the show, and it had the trajectory, the characters, the plot, the setting, it all been established already, right? And I thought it was wonderful. I just thought it was a little inappropriate for little kids because the world is depressing enough without telling everybody, and now look what happens. So every now and then, you don't make decisions in a vacuum. You make them with a group of people. Everybody has different feelings slightly about the show. And we just wanted to, have fun with it, and we do it quite often. I mean, I forget what season it was. What's the season with all the monster prisoners in the spaceship? Right, where at the very end, we think it all died, but then the camera comes down and you find a hand moving or something. And in this case, it was, a light blinking. And we did it just because we wanted to imply that, life goes on. Sometimes when you frame an actor, you don't frame them perfectly. Sometimes you want to make sure there's actors who are half cut off because you want to imply that the world goes on beyond the frame of the television set. And the same thing happens in story. So here, at the very end, we show everybody thinks everything's over with and they're all celebrating, but the red light's still blinking. This guy is still alive. And oh my God, what's going to happen next? The season's over with. But then, as you know, right, decades later, we picked that up again, and it actually kind of worked kind of nice. It was kind of fun, right? That was a fun plot point. Now, little teeny kids don't know it because they don't remember the show from 10 years ago. But in one of the first seasons, we implied that the villain's still alive somewhere in the code. And then later on, when the computer code takes over, we imply that it was that one from 20 years ago. And it works for older fans who know the one before, and it works for younger fans who didn't know. So it just kind of worked magically that we could make it work that way. And it was really fun. As a writer, when you find things you can call back to that'll be understandable and appreciated by everybody, it makes it a lot of fun to write the show that way. So, I think that at the beginning, we had that idea, but we didn't want to give it away too much because obviously everybody would guess it and there wouldn't be any kind of surprise. But at the same time, every time you write an episode, your production is racing to get these things done, and you're trying to keep the scripts, up because they're coming down. Everything is waiting on the scripts, right? So you're getting them done. You just don't have time to think 20 episodes ahead what's going to happen, except in very broad strokes. So things change as you move along until you finally get to the episode where you're going to do that reveal, and a lot of other things have changed, and you may have done a good job of laying the track for it. Maybe you did a poor job. The last few episodes, you try to lay a little bit more and try to some hints and clues, and maybe it works and maybe it doesn't. And really good showrunners make it work really well, and people who don't really give a damn maybe don't make it work so well. And I don't know that things work really well with us because we have so many other things we're up against. Like the scripts and the tapes coming and all kinds of strange things happening that we can't anticipate. But that one, we had an idea at the beginning it was going to work that way, and I think it was kind of cool, personally.
You know what? You brought him up, and I realized that's another connection to Super Sentai I would like to bring up is Koichi Sakamoto, who has worked with both of you, if I'm not mistaken. Like, and now he's just Mr. Toku in Japan. Like, he's now done Ultraman, Kamen Rider, Super Sentai. What can you tell us about working with Koichi Sakamoto?
Yeah. I mean, it was great. It was a little intimidating at first because you have to remember, like, I was a complete newbie. Like, I had, kind of touched on the first Power Rangers movie. It was just involved with like some of the costumes, very briefly. And then other than having friends that worked on various seasons, I was an outsider. But that was one of the reasons why Disney picked me. I was working on some other things with them, and they were just like, "Oh, you'll fit in good here. We need some fresh blood." But unfortunately, that term, like fresh blood, went over to New Zealand and kind of scared everyone. They thought I was more like the cleaner, like I was coming in to, kind of take accounting on everyone and kick people out. And, this was Koichi's baby. He had been involved since almost the very beginning. So at first it was like this weird kind of intimidating, like he was very quiet and, didn't really want to talk about it. And I was trying to do all these new ideas. But then after we had written the first episode, because I was going to direct it, I storyboarded the whole thing, and I storyboarded what I wanted for second unit. And they were like, "Oh, no, you can't do that. You can't give Koichi." But I was like, well, I at least want to show him what's in my mind. And we didn't really talk a lot about it, but he went out and shot. And when the footage came back, it was like frame for frame what I had boarded. And
really?
I was like, wow. And I just went and thanked him. And then from that point on, we were just like great friends. He, just tried to, come to me. And I mean, there were little things like the female Red Ranger or, certain things where I just wanted to do things differently. And he was one of the main people that were like, there are rules, and I was like, yeah, but we're 13 years into this. We got to break it a little to make it. But I mean, in terms of stunts, like I've worked with a lot of stunt people on a lot of movies. And just as Chip said, you go out there, I mean, they probably make more money just selling tickets to watch these guys do the stunts. They would do these things. There'd be 50 wires and then, the person would go up and do 1,000 spins, like so professional, so tight. And like I said, even though he had been involved with the Japanese side from the beginning, when they finally saw SPD footage, they were like, you know what? We're going to start coming and shooting with you guys in New Zealand. Like, he's just that good. His whole team, his wife, everybody.
When we started Power Rangers, we hired Hollywood stuntmen to do all the fights. Mm-hmm. Well, first we actually tried having some of the Rangers, the cast, be in their costumes, and that went nowhere. That was awful because they don't know that. A few of them know a little bit of karate, but not all of them, right? That's not a prerequisite, as Iris will tell you. You don't have to know karate to be a Power Ranger. So what we did was we hired these Hollywood stuntmen, and the fights in the Japanese, which we're cutting in, are all really great karate fights, right? Then you cut to our fights, and they were like punches, like fisticuffs, like Western
bar fights,
and it was really embarrassing. It was awful. They were good stuntmen, but there was a completely different fighting style. They didn't know karate, so Jonathan Zahor, who was the producer at the time, he said, well, why don't we get people from Japan? And I was like, oh my God, can we do that? So we called our friends in Japan who were making the show, and we said, can you send us a stunt team? And they sent us a stunt team. They didn't speak English, and Koichi was their leader, and they started to do, what we asked them to make this footage work. And it was, they weren't great at first, but they were much better than the Americans had been. But shortly they became very good, led by Koichi. And Koichi is evidence. You guys have all heard of quiet quitting recently. So my advice would be, if you want to quietly quit, just quit, because that means you have a dead end job. If you want to have a job, you want to actually get ahead, like Koichi did, who came here, didn't know what the hell he was doing on our show. We told him, he figured it out, and I'm telling you, within a couple seasons, anything you would ask him to do, they'd figure out. His answer was always, do you remember, Iris, in the meetings, he would say, show. That was what he'd say. Can you have him walk across the ceiling, and we want to do like a zero gravity fight? Show. And it was always sure. There was never a no, because he would just go figure it out with his team. And he would do storyboards to the more complicated stuff. His crew would then come in on the weekends. Unbeknownst to us, they'd come in on the weekends, and they would do their stunt training practice on the weekends. If someone got cut or hurt, we didn't hear about it. That's the opposite of quiet quitting. It's working your ass off, and now he's the guy in Japan you go to if you want to do these kind of fights, right? So
and on SPD, he became an executive producer of the show.
Right. When he went to New Zealand, I think he was the executive producer for a while. Then when I went there, that there was a whole revolt on the crew from what had been happening previous to my arrival, and Koichi left. But he had a guy who worked under him named Yuji, who had also been on the show forever, since year 1 or 2. And Yuji is also terrific, just like Koichi. He doesn't get as much name recognition, but he's fantastic. These guys are all very quiet, very low key. And they do a great job. And another guy named Masaki, and now they have a new stuntman there. But all of them, they work their butts off. You never hear about it. There's never a complaint. And why am I bragging about this so much? Not just because they're friends of mine, but because I keep hearing about this quiet quitting thing. What are you doing? Just quit and go find a job that you can work your butt off, and you can go through through some kind of a ceiling. If it's a dead end job, then quiet quit, but just quit. You guys see you guys know what I'm saying, right? This whole quiet quitting thing.
Yeah, because this job, beyond the cool karate fights, like, it is not an easy job. I know a lot of you guys come in cosplay, but have any of you ever worn like a full like creature suit, like one of the giant, like, they weigh hundreds of pounds. It's
and they're filled with sweat.
We're usually filming in the summer, so it's like 90 degrees, and you're just sweating. And then they're like, "Oh, you need to jump 15 feet over that thing," and they do it. It doesn't matter if you're like, "Dude, dress up like the Pink Ranger," or wear this suit that your other guy was just sweating in for 2 hours. They just, whatever needs to be done, they do it, and they just make it look like art every time.
The actors get on their marks, and the crew stands back. And the monsters get on their marks, and then Koichi or Yuji says, "Action!" and they do the thing. And as soon as he yells, "Cut!" all the other Japanese stuntmen who maybe are not in the shot, right? They maybe are dressed in the costume or whatever. They literally run in from the sidelines, pull off the head, and one guy holds a fan while the director is looking at a monitor, and he's seeing the shot, and he's deciding whether it's good or not good enough. What is he going to change about it? Then he says to him, change this, change that. I want that fast. I want that bigger. And then he says, "Okay." And he looks back at the monitor, and all the people, they put on the head, they take the fans away, they run off the set, literally run. If you don't run, you go back to Japan. They run off the set, and they literally, they wait on the sidelines like this, watching like this. And then he says, "Action!" And they do it again. And then he says, "Okay, that's good." And then they grab the actors, they pull them away, and they get ready for the next shot. But literally, they run. And that's what it takes to be on the second unit. First unit is also very, very hard working, but they have actors, and there's makeup and there's wardrobe.
You're always waiting on something.
Yeah, they're always waiting on something there. But second unit, there's no makeup, there's no wardrobe. They literally are running on and off the set, and it's really, they're doing it because you asked them to, for no other reason, and because Koichi or Yuji, have their respect, and it's really an amazing thing to see. And when people come to visit the sets, second unit is always the most intriguing thing.
Yeah. And I don't know if you guys ever noticed, but sorry.
See, didn't I tell you the heart? See the heart.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys noticed, but one of the things that I loved about them is a lot of times when they're not in the ranger suits or in the creature suits, if they're just doubling the actors, obviously our actors are American, they're Japanese, they'll have wigs on, so they can't show their face. No matter what the move is, no matter how they land, even if it's wrong, they always end, with somehow like covering their face for that last frame. They never miss. It's like they would be perfect spies. You would never see their face, but it's like you don't really think about it, but it's like it's an art that they're just conscious of, that they just, no matter what the move is, they just can't be seen by camera, and they never miss. It's
and
fantastic.
you guys might ask, how many stuntmen do you get? And how do you know which ones play which actors, and so on and so forth, right? Yuji or Koichi, they look at the footage and they say, okay, the Blue Ranger is very big and very, very beefy. He knows he has to get that kind of a type of a guy. The Pink Ranger is very, very short, and has very narrow hips or very, who knows what. Whatever the body types are, the stunt director has to go out there and he has to hire his team. And we in New Zealand are like, we don't even worry about it, because we know that Koichi or Yuji will figure it out, and they'll bring a team of about 13 guys and girls. They come over from Japan. Very few of them speak any English, and now you got all these quiet. Few of them have come before, but a lot of them are new, and they have no idea what to do. And then we got this brand new cast that Iris has hired for us, right? These people don't know karate. These people are world-class karate people, and now somehow you have to make everybody work together. So what do? You have training.
Boot camp.
You put the cast, and you literally put them all together. You almost tie them at the hip. And the stuntman, the person who's going to double, for instance, the Yellow Ranger, or double the Blue Ranger, they become best friends. They tie them at the hips, and this person teaches the Ranger how to make sure they don't break their bones, they don't cut themselves, they go downstairs and do this or they do that, and they learn how to do karate in such a way that it looks impressive on the camera. Are they great karate people? No, they really don't know. They know a few things that the cinematographer and the stunt director will make look like they're fantastic karate people, but otherwise they really don't know that much. But it's really a great thing to that week when they come to New Zealand for prep and they start to work with the stunt crew. It is so cool to see everybody going from these shy, oh my God, kind of scared of what they're going to do. They're in a foreign place. Nobody speaks the same language. Next thing you know, as Ira says, they're all best of friends. And by the time you leave after filming for 9 months, they're all in tears saying goodbye to each other. It's really amazing. How many people are on the Power Ranger crew? Does anybody know? How many people? 150. Can you believe that? 150 people between the two units. That's not including the cast. That's just the crew. 150 people, and we have to remember all their names.
Yeah.
It's a little
yeah,
tricky
and it's hard
sometimes.
because they all remember your name because you're in charge. So, but then they only have to remember, those few names. But then you have to remember every single person's name. And
Yeah.
actually, funny story in regards to that. Do you guys know Piggy? It was Barney Duncan. Well, I met Barney we had like a meet and greet dinner right before the first week of shooting. And I had his life cast, but I sculpted Piggy over it, so then I really didn't see his face. But I met him, we chatted for a little bit, and then the first day of shooting, I went and applied his makeup, and then I went off to direct, and then the makeup team took over and applied his makeup every day. So every day that I saw him for like the next, 5 months, he was Piggy. Then one night, we just had, it was like some kind of break, and we just had this little gathering. This guy comes up, and he's just like talking to me, and he's talking to me in his Kiwi accent. Barney's from New Zealand, where Piggy is like, hey, he talks like this. Yeah. I was talking to this guy for like 20 minutes, and I'm like, I have no idea who this guy is. And then he was like, hey, mate, thanks for, letting me be Piggy. And I was like, holy shit. I was like, dude. But I just not seen his face for so long. So, yeah, it's hard to keep track of everybody.
How do you guys feel about one more question for the audience? All right. Let's see. You're right there.
Uh-oh. I don't know.
I have no idea.
Is that neither of us?
No, I can't tell you. well, I don't know about SPD, but RPM I think is much more adult. And we wrote it that way. It was shot that way. It was acted that way. It was cast that way. It was even the scene direction, right? It was very realistic. It wasn't goofy. Everything was rather realistic and very dark. And even though I thought it was a good season, I thought it was terrible Power Rangers because I wouldn't want my kid to be watching. I mean, look, the world is scary enough, right? With nuclear weapons and all these crazy people out there. So to show kids that, this is a world where everything's been destroyed and now they have to, find a way to survive inside these walls. Oh God, I thought that was depressing. but it was, that show was that way because for some reason, honestly, I think that Disney had decided they were going to sell the show and nobody really wanted it. Remember, Disney is a bunch of executives. And the executives, they want the show that they can make into a success and they can make a name for themselves and they can rise up. Not quiet quitting, right? So if the Power Rangers are going to be sold in a season or two, who wants that show, right? Who wants to be the executive on that show? And so they hired me to come and work on it because the guy who had been hired originally, Eddie somebody, right? You guys probably know Eddie. He, I think, set up an interesting show, but he had production problems and schedule delays and budget overruns, and so they got rid of him. And I came in and took over, and I wrote the show that had already been started, and we made it. And I thought it was good, but again, there was very little humor in it, except what came out of the Ranger world. There were no comical characters, and that's why I think most people like it, because it was more like a dark DC comic. And even there's some episodes I really like. There's a couple I really like. Some of the best that I think ever Power Rangers did, but I don't think if I was a 3 to 6 year old I would like it as much. Well, think about it. When we first made the show, it was all little teeny kids, right? All little teeny kids. Then 10 years later, it's 15-year-olds and little teeny kids. And then 20 years later, it's 25-year-olds. And now it's 40-year-olds and 30 and 20 and 10 and 3 to 5. And 3 to 5 are going to buy the toy. So who do you think Disney or Hasbro cares about the most? 3 to 6-year-olds. But we don't want to, make a show just for 3 to 6-year-olds.
Yeah, we're not making Teletubbies. Yeah. Yeah, and I would say with SPD, that's it in a nutshell. It was like, I signed on and they were like, we got to sell the toys. This is a show for kids. And I was like, fine, but there's still a story here. And I want it to be a story that I enjoy, I mean, luckily I, probably have the maturity of like a 10-year-old. So I fit right in there. But I was like, when I was 7, I saw Star Wars and I was like, that's what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And this was my opportunity to kind of like make my own version of Star Wars within the Power Ranger world. So it was like, I think the biggest mistake you can make when you're writing a show is to try to think down to an audience. Like, I'll think like a 4-year-old. Like that, you just have to write something that makes sense and people will love it or they won't love it. But it's true. If it's honest, there's an audience,
Okay, I think that does wrap us up for today. Everyone, thank you very much to Chip Lynn and Greg
Thank you,
Arnowitz.
guys.
Thank you so much. Is there anything you guys would like to promote before we head out officially? Or where they can find you, social media, etc.?
Labradoodles rule.
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to plug, I'll plug. I'm actually working on a feature film right now, and I'm doing a thing where if you sign up online, you'll be able to like see me actually build it. It's all animatronic puppets. So you can watch me make them and follow the whole process. So come by the booth and sign up.
Awesome. Okay, folks, thanks so much.